Let's go into happy things here. Thank you for taking
Okay.
time out. And I want to begin our conversation with we're going on the 4-year anniversary of this pandemic. How did you get through the pandemic when it started in 2020, and how did it change you?
Oh boy, that was something, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I got through it by making short films in the home with my husband.
good.
And I think otherwise I really would have lost my mind. And I've seen some people who actually seem to have lost their mind since then. So it doesn't feel like a speculation that I could have spiraled into some sort of deep depression. I started making these little short films. At first, they were like 10 seconds long. They're just like little cartoons of what my husband and I were going through. And they got longer and longer. And by the end of the pandemic, I had, I think, a 13-minute film that I sent around to festivals. And they were shot in the home. They reflected, the madness that was our lives at that point. Just the simplest things like, do we have to talk about food again? And people watched them and would write me or even call me and say, "You are helping me so much get through this." And so having a purpose like that uh, got me through it.
Yeah,
Just feeling like I was helping other people who were stuck in their little spaces helped me with mine. And it turned out to be. And then I, after a while, I ran out of material with my husband. And I dug out of my closet these old string puppets, these old marionettes
yeah,
that my mother and I had made when I was in high school. And I
yeah.
hadn't I hadn't used them since then. And not only did I start making films with them, but I actually started creating marionettes. And I don't know how I made them because I am not artsy craftsy. I believe that my mother visited me and helped me make them, and they turned out really great. Uh, and so I started telling stories with them. And to tell you the truth, I got a little weird.
That's okay.
I got so personally involved in these little puppets and their stories and and what they looked like and who they were. Uh, that I think we all escaped however we could.
Yeah, I
And so
agree.
that became my escape, was
Good for
telling
you.
stories about these guys, who they were, what they were living through. They were oblivious to the pandemic,
Yeah,
but they lived alongside humans who were going through it. So
yeah.
they were just kind of trying to figure it out.
Sure, sure.
And it helped me to make that story.
So let me ask you this. If I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day in this very day of 2024, if they were to ask you, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
I would say I was a writer.
Okay.
Yeah, I started out as an actress, and I had a nice career for a while, and in regional theater mainly, traveling from city to city, doing different plays. I focused on the classics mostly, and did a lot of Shakespeare. And it was a great career for your 20s and 30s. And then I just started seeing the writing on the wall with that. I just felt like, for me, I couldn't be a regional theater actress forever. It's a good thing I made that decision because theater's going through so much turmoil right now.
Yeah.
Um, but I started thinking, and another problem was that I lived in New York, but I was never in New York. I was always going to other cities doing plays. And so when I would get back to New York, people, casting people would say, "So, what have you done recently?" And what I had done recently was like in Seattle or Pittsburgh, and they didn't care. So I started writing my own material. And at first, I did a one-woman show in New York, and that went very well. And then I started writing uh, more characters and more characters. And pretty soon, I started feeling like I don't necessarily need to be in this.
Yeah.
I just enjoy writing them now. And so I started putting my actor friends in them and expanding that way. And at that point, those were just like one acts, one
Yeah.
act plays. So an opportunity came by for me to understudy the national tour of the Heidi Chronicles. I don't know if you remember that play. It was written
Yeah.
by Wendy Wasserstein. And understudying normally would be like, oh, so that means I don't get on stage probably. I just sit in the wings and wait for it to be over, and then I go home. Boring, But I thought, here's a chance to get paid good money because it pays pretty well, and sit in a hotel room seeing if I can write. And so I took the money. It was a 9-month tour, and by the end of the 9 months, I had written my first full-length play. I would have the actors at night after the show. They'd come up into my hotel room, and we'd all lie on the beds and read the play. And it was, and these are great actors. They've gone. Some of them have gone on to, quite a bit of fame.
Yeah.
Um, and I learned a great deal about uh, how my play was working and how it wasn't working and how to restructure it. And by the time I got done, I had a really good play, which got done at the Manhattan Theater Club and was extremely well reviewed. And that really launched my playwriting career
Yeah.
and had that kind of credibility.
How did this happen? Tell me where you were born and raised. How did these seeds of becoming an actress and a writer and being creative, how did this happen?
Well, I think it had something to do with both my parents. My father was a he was very invested in the early days of television. He believed in it greatly, and he started his career just as someone who would sell ad time for television. And he was a real self-made man, so that was inspirational. He was somebody who could convince you to buy the shirt off your own back. And so he followed this TV trajectory, and when we would travel, my family moved around from city to city as he took different jobs at different TV stations. And finally, he became the general manager of one in Minneapolis, I think. And from then on, he was the general manager. As we moved, he would, take their market and turn it into something bigger than it was. And back then, it had to do with the local news and how that was structured, and it had to do with putting in a cooking show, for instance, or he had a show called Ask the Manager, which he loved to do because he was the star of it. And people would write in and say, how do you run this TV station? Now, TV has changed a great deal since then.
Yeah.
And being the manager of a local affiliate is no big deal. You don't get to really call too many shots. You do what the network tells you to do.
Yeah.
So it's I don't think he'd be having half as much fun if he were doing this now.
Yeah.
And my mother was a playwright initially. Actually, in college, she was a playwright. She was the first woman to have one of her plays done at Yale Grad School. And so that was quite a feather in her cap. And then she moved to New York and started writing for CBS Radio. That's where she met my dad.
Right
And
on.
uh, so the two of them, and I have a memory when I was a kid of seeing both of them on stage in community theater and
Very cool.
feeling like, wow, what is this? I love this. I want to do this.
That's
So,
great. That's great. What a great story. So who's been a hero for you? Someone that's been very inspirational for you in your life?
well, I guess my dad, and my mom too. Um, but he's someone who died young. My mother got to live to the nice, ripe old age of 94. My dad died at 54. And it was the greatest tragedy of our family. It took us all a decade to recover because he was one of those people who just seemed like nothing could defeat him. He was just a big, gregarious Irishman with an easy laugh, and nothing was wrong. No matter what was wrong, it wasn't really wrong. And it was shocking to all of us when he died suddenly of a heart attack on the golf course. But he was the one who inspired me to be brave enough to try to do things. I was kind of a wallflower and terribly, cripplingly shy as a kid. He was always pushing me, get out there, kid, get out there. You can do it. Come on, run for office. You got to do this. You got to run. God, he made me run for school office. It was terrible. But uh, when he died, my grief was so extreme that, you feel the void of their personal characteristics and missing from your life. And so I decided to fill that void by having those characteristics myself. It may sound a little weird, but I I sort of faked it till I made it. I faked the confidence. I faked the easygoing, I can do this vibe, uh, the confident, you can put your trust in me thing, which I never had
Yeah.
prior to his death. And after a while, I just felt like I incorporated it into my own personality. It's amazing
That
what
is.
grief
Yeah.
will do.
I mean, that's an amazing healing mechanism too. I mean, I remember
Yes.
when I was a kid, my best friend who had chronic health problems, he used to go inside and hook up to the IV. He had liver issues and he ended
Uh,
up dying when I was 16. He was 17. I remember telling his mom one time, I worked at the grocery store and her name was Ginger. And I said, Ginger, I just want you to understand something. I'm going to run a little harder in life to live for him and
yes.
me. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of that immaculate duality.
Absolutely, and it's honoring their life to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's
Yeah.
that's I guess what was going with me. It helps you, it helps, I mean, it doesn't help them, but maybe it helped his mom to hear that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Um, so let me ask you this. As a creative in various capacities, what is the motivator for you every day to wake up and to not only create, but to evolve as a human being? What is that for you?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think for me, I think, you've gotta stay interested in life. There are days when you wake up and you're like, "Why?" You know? Um, I mean, I'm sort of a buoyant personality, so I don't wake up with too many mornings like that, but I know a lot of people who do. And the trajectory of their morning is they wake up depressed and it takes all day to get themselves into some kind of shape. I'm sort of the opposite. I wake up a little more hopeful and let the day degrade me. But for me, being able to start writing on something, being able to create a story, being able to even express myself articulately in some avenue, it satisfies some inner thing that needs expressing. And I can't even really speak to what exactly that is, but it is an addiction for sure. I would say it's a healthy addiction. There are so many other things you could be addicted to.
Yeah.
And it, when I'm doing it, I feel as though I'm connected to something bigger than myself. And I think that's what we all need. I think that's why some people go to church, or
Yeah.
probably most people, is they need that feeling of being connected to something bigger. When I was an actress, that something bigger was theater. Something about being on stage, telling a story in front of an audience, that really satisfied the need to feel like you're part of a whole, you
Yeah.
know? And then as I became a writer, um, it's a different kind of satisfaction, but it's very tangible of that feeling of communication, reaching out. Nothing makes me happier than when someone says to me, God, I saw your play and I know just what you're talking about. I've had that experience. I felt that way. I was deeply moved. It's about communication.
Yeah.
And that's why I worry so much about AI, but that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, that that can't be a wormhole.
Can't
So
get into that.
so let me ask you this. What was the first standing ovation or fan letter or response that you got where it really literally was like the first drug for you, where you were like, wow, this is the life. This is what I want to do.
And when you ask that question, something pops into my head that may not be the absolute first, but it was certainly the most important, which was this play that I wrote that I told you about, was about my high school boyfriend and the woman that he had married, uh, who had cancer and had been struggling with it for some years and was clearly in the final stages of it. She was only 30 something when I met her. And I was so I was so moved by her, and I liked her so enormously, and the injustice of her death seemed so it's incredibly horrible to me that that's what my play became about. It became about this person who's on a tour. Actually made it more like Wendy Wasserstein because she's a writer who's on a tour who comes into her hometown of Boston and meets up with her high school boyfriend and his wife who has cancer. And it sort of was a comedy in a
Yeah.
way, believe it or not, because she starts telling the story and getting a little maudlin. And the character playing this other girl stands up and says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait a minute. You're telling this story wrong. This isn't how it was at all." And I, so when I wrote it, I did not expect it to get picked up very quickly. I didn't have a career yet as a writer. But because of the events that occurred, very lucky events that occurred that led to it being, I got an offer from the Manhattan Theater Club to have it done, which is a big theater in New York. Uh, I had to tell her about it. And I was terrified. And I said, I wrote this play about you, and if you don't want it to be done, I will say no to them. So she read it, and 4 weeks went by. And I thought, oh my God, she hated it. She hates me. Oh no.
Yeah.
And finally, she called me and she said, I've read it 4 times, and I think you should do it. It's very important. It's partially fictionalized, which is cool, and I think you should do it. So that fall, which is very fast in theater world, they did the play. In fact, they wanted to push it back to the spring, but I said, no, no, you can't. She will not be alive. And so they kept it in the fall, and we did it. And she and her husband came to the preview of it. They were in Boston. I was in New York. He worked at a place called Milton Academy, which is a private school. And those people raised the money for her to be flown to New York. And they put him up at the Riga Royal Hotel right across the street from City Center. And she came to the preview. I'm getting chills just talking about this. And she sat in the second row. I remember this so vividly. She and Peter sat in the second row center. And apparently they rolled out the red carpet for her because she was using a walker at that point. And I was playing her. This was when
Wow.
I was still sort of doing the hybrid acting
Yeah.
writing thing. And I was playing her. So, have a little pressure.
Yeah.
And I did the play. I was so nervous. I just thought I was going to die. But I tried to do it as honestly as I could, capturing her real great no bullshit personality, her great sense of humor, all of that. And at the end we took the curtain call, and everyone stood. She could not stand, but she was there with this big grin on her face, just a huge smile. And her husband was tears pouring down his face. And I've never felt such a magical experience in my entire life.
Wow.
And it to me, I actually thought at the time, it'll never get any better than this. I am telling this woman's story who is not going to live very much longer. And
Yeah.
weirdly, she died on our closing day. Um, we were told about it at the matinee. And her husband said that he felt that our play was keeping her alive
Wow.
because every night she would say to him, well, the actors are coming to the dressing room now. They're putting on their makeup. The show's about to start. And uh, and then on our last day, she died.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's crazy. Wow, that's great. That's amazing. So let
yeah.
me ask you this. Of all of the things that you've done and become and overcome in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Mm. Well, that's right up there.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's that's it, really. I mean,
Yeah,
that's it. That was I've I've never done anything since then. That I've had a lot of, nice successes with plays, and things that people have responded well to. And I've worked on TV series, and those were fun. And I've worked on film with movie stars and stuff, and those were fun. Nothing compares to that.
yeah.
However, I can't think of anything that tops that. The birth of my daughter. Um, but creatively, you're talking about,
Yeah, I mean,
and
I think probably usually when it comes to family, it's usually children.
yeah,
So
that's the unsaid first thing.
yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this. Let me kind of take the baton in a different direction. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, all of your fans, everybody that knows you, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, that's evolved. Um, I used to not like myself as much as I do now. And I used to be much more deeply insecure. And I used to worry what people thought about me a lot. And I don't even think about it now.
Mhm.
I mean, it's, you reach a certain age and it's like, this is me, I'm cooked. So if you like it, that's cool, and if you don't like it, okay, that's that too. Um, but I think that over the years, I've managed to become a lot stronger as a person and not be so neurotic. I feel like as I look back on it, and especially when I see my daughter at that age and all the crazy neuroses that go on,
Yeah.
and the hormones that are zooming through your body that just make the world a little too nuts. I'm really grateful to have reached an age where none of that stuff possesses me the way it used to. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. How do you feel? Do you feel like you're happier with who you are now than you were,
Oh,
say, when you
yeah.
were in high school? Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah, getting older because you don't remember all of the peccadillos that go into, what you do early on, what bothered you then, but you have to get
right.
nicked up, you have to get scraped, you have to feel exhilaration, you have to feel divorce, you have to feel remarriage, you have to feel children. There's all of these forces that you hear about that are all a part of art, but you don't feel it until you actually do it. And if
Yes,
you find a way to evolve and to keep that glass half full, you're going to get to a point where you're gonna really enjoy older age. Because I just turned 51, and I'm already starting to have thoughts of, "Man, I don't wanna leave. I really dig what's going on," but you know that you're getting to that point. The sun's not rising anymore like it used to. It's starting to go the other way, and,
people
it's
aren't talking about your great potential anymore.
right. You're not like, "Oh my god, I wanna do all of this with my life." Not that you don't, but there's a
Right.
different fervor. It's like, I've had the chance to go to college campuses in my life, and when I get there, that's an incubator of energy that's just ready to explode. And
Yes.
that's a different vibe. So whenever you can, I don't know, at this point when you've lived through, because I see them doing all these things, and I'm like, man, how many times is that dude gonna get divorced? How many kids is she gonna have? Like, you're just playing these scenarios out in your head, but you don't know until you live them, and that's the backbone of art. I think it's the backbone of good theater. It's the reason why Shakespeare has resonated and will continue timelessly through our lives and the lives
Yes.
and lives of generations that go on, you know?
Yes. Yes.
So,
I think for when they're, you're college age and a little bit probably into your 30s, the stakes are so high.
yeah,
Everything seems like the stakes are so high.
yeah,
And the realization that they're maybe not as high as you think because other stuff is going to happen to you
yeah,
that's going to really overshadow what you're telling me about right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
But you
yeah.
can't really tell them that, can you?
Right, no, you can't because they're gonna have no idea. It's interesting. I was just thinking about your story about the play and how magnanimous that was. I have a jazz radio show, and my dream, I used to go down to the Folly Theater. I would call, and it's downtown Kansas City. It's this great theater that just has housed all of these legendary performances over the years. And I used to call a radio station and win tickets before I had a jazz show. And eventually, fast forward, I got this show. I always thought, how cool would it be to host? There's a jazz talk before the show, and how cool it would be to get to the point to do that. And I got offered the gig. And my
Uh-huh.
gig about a month ago was with a band called the Hot Sardines, and it's kind of this 1920s revival thing that gets people moving. And Miss Elizabeth is a lead singer, and it's this band, and I interviewed them in 2015 on their way to Kansas City. And I'm a writer too, so I wrote a poem about my experience with being on the phone with her, and it got published. And I actually presented it at this place called the Writers Place in Kansas City in front of my old college professor. And all of it came full circle. So when I was going to do this jazz talk, I had the actual copy in a book. And I didn't think that she was going to think much of it. I was like, just going to show you this poem. I made a copy. And I hand it to her right before we go out to do the jazz talk. And she's like, "What is this?" And I said, "I wrote a poem about you and it got published and I recited it." And she was like, "Are you kidding me? Can I have this?" And I just didn't even expect it was going to be a blip. She took it and she said, "Oh my God." And she started tearing up and she's like, "I got to frame this when I get home." And it was just one of those
Oh,
moments where
wow.
you're like, where your art comes full circle. It becomes something
Yes.
that goes from being real, imaginary, this carousel of just infinite
Yes.
possibilities,
Isn't
So
that what
anyway,
isn't that what art does, it makes your life larger too.
yeah,
I think probably for my friend Kathy, she felt as though her life was now, it's set on a stage. It's larger. It's
yeah,
she's gonna leave something behind.
We
And even though she didn't write it, it was her.
we all in one way or another, no matter how our egos are in check or not, want to be immortalized. We don't want to see our time on down here not be, validated. We want to have the punch ticket, and that right there is the ultimate form of it, So,
How beautiful that she was that moved.
well, and as we got off stage, she was like, "Man, my husband doesn't even write poetry like this." And I'm like, "Uh-oh, what kind of inferno am I going to create in their house when they get?" But anyway, and that's the idea of poetry too. You're just taking these myopic moments of time and you're just making it magnanimous with the shortest amount of words, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Do you write a lot of poetry?
Yeah, I've done that my whole life. It's my journal, so to speak. It's my way of therapeutically dealing with the insanity of life. So, you
It's
know.
kind of word jazz, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it's improv. It's one time because even if I get in front of a microphone to recite it, I'm still gonna bumble around and not say it right as it should be. So it's like jazz. It happens once, it's vapor, and it's gone.
Wow. Yeah.
So
I
that's
love that.
that's the beauty of it for sure.
Yeah.
So so
When I'm
if
writing plays, I have the same experience of wanting there to be a wanting to hear the music of the words.
yeah,
I'm not good at writing poetry. I've tried. It sucks. But with plays, I hear the voices in my head.
uh-huh,
I hear the timbre of how I want the actor to sound, and I hear the music of it.
yeah.
I feel as though that's a little bit of the same thing.
I have one of my best friends of all time. He used to be the poet laureate of Kansas. His name is Kevin Rabus, and he's a jazz musician. And he writes scripts and he'd make short films. And I think about my brain doesn't work like that. Like I don't go into that place if I try to do it. But for
Mhm.
him, it makes total sense. It all comes
Yeah.
together. And I always think whenever I watch, because sometimes he'll send over like pieces of scripts. I always think about somebody told me years ago when I was trying to learn the drums, don't hit it so hard. It's not about
Mhm.
how hard you hit it. Don't be John Bonham. Just go for rhythm. Just go for that. And I think about that with script writing. It's the subtleties. It's the Arthur Miller of it. It's that unlit cigarette, or it's that one moment that you're just like, okay, it's the poet
Yeah.
brain in me, but it's those little moments that just punch out of the page or punch out of the
Yes.
script that are
Yes.
undeniably human, but
Yes.
artistically polished well.
Yes. Yes. That's right. How well said.
So it's fun for
Yeah,
sure.
it is. You should. Sounds like maybe you should try to write a play.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to be in a play in high school with one of my drama teachers. Our town was it, and all I had was one line, and it was, "Oh, ma, I have to learn all about Canada by 10 o'clock." And I don't know what happened, but I never got into that play. I don't think the teacher really liked me, but I thought it was fun. It got it's kind of like broadcasting. There's a level of it where we're all kind of actors anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe at some point in my life, as the sun starts going down, I'll get that bucket out and kick it one more time real hard and see what I can do.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with, as you said, what you're exposed to. I got involved in plays because my family was doing that, and
Yeah.
and then you get what Malcolm what's his name, Malcolm
Gladwell. I love
Gladwell
him.
calls it your 10,000 hours, right?
Right.
And so I did theater for a number of years, and I did I probably did 50, 75, a lot of plays. And after a while, the music of plays gets inside your system,
Yeah.
and you start realizing how they're supposed to go. You realize that, oh, there's got to be a turning event here. I got to introduce my people here. I got to pay this off. I got to pay that. Now we need a turning point. Um, and so when I started writing a play, I felt the music of how it was supposed to go.
Yeah.
And I've coached writers since then who really never were in plays, never really intuited what they were like from the inside out. And I find I have to explain to them real simple nuts and bolts stuff that it would never have occurred to me needed to be explained.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
haven't, like I don't play the piano. And if
Right.
anybody were to teach me how to play the piano, they'd probably be shocked at the rudimentary things they have to explain to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you're a master of it. And that's the thing. I'm always fascinated by the actors that go to Broadway, like Doogie Howser. That's
Yeah, Neil Patrick Harris.
Yeah, that's kinda his bread and butter. He's hosted the Tonys, he loves to do theater. Like Jim Parsons from Big Bang Theory, he doesn't do any of that anymore. He does theater, and I'm always fascinated because I think at the end of the day, to have the acumen and the backbone to do theater far outweighs any other acting in the world. The
It
level of
does.
vulnerability, the level of putting yourself out there, being in front of people, not having the faux pas of a camera in front of you. There is a grit that's different, and I always
And
admire that.
everybody is breathing together.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. We're a living entity, and it's a different living entity with every show.
yeah,
It's almost like an organism.
uh-huh,
And the audience comprises how the play is going to go in a lot of ways, in a really subtle way,
yeah,
because you've got your script and it's not going to change. But the audience feeds the direction, the subtle direction that it's going to take that night, which is so different from film. Film is set in stone. Once
yeah.
it's there, it's
Oh, yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like theatrical jazz, you know? It's the improv
Exactly.
of it because you do.
Yeah.
You feed off of the energy particles that are around you. I mean, I've been to enough shows where you're just sitting there and you're like almost like the ghost of Coltrane floated through and you're like, "Whoa, that was crazy."
Wow.
Like, I remember
Yeah.
one time I saw a pianist, his name was Phil DeGreg, I'll never forget this. He was at the Blue Room off 18th and Vine, very historic place, and there was a storm going on outside, and
Ooh.
big crash of lightning and all of the power went out. But he was on the piano and the bass player was doing acoustic and everything, drums was acoustic. So everything, mics went off, but you could still hear him play. And we're all just sitting there and they just kind of kept going. And then everything came back up. And it was like just the absence of our human intermingling got just interceded at one moment. And it just
Yeah.
became a magical thing. And they just
And it
kind of
must have
went
been
through.
very quiet because people
Yeah,
stopped talking, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then everybody, but only people that were talking, ironically, were the ones that were probably telling everybody to stop talking during the shows. And it was the owner going, "What the hell is going on?" And it's the home of Charlie Parker. So we're like, is there some reverberating thing from the thunderclap that happened the night he died? So anyway, there's all kinds of
Ooh,
suppositions going on at that point. So
that's very
um
cool.
yeah, it was awesome. So, if anyone out there wants to see your work, reach out, anything about your world, where
Oh,
can they go?
yeah. First of all, can I plug my novel?
Please, I want yes, absolutely.
I should have mentioned this a while ago. I've written my very first novel, and it's a historical novel about. It takes place during the French Renaissance. It's Marguerite de Valois, who I had never heard of before until I got to France,
Yeah,
and her relationship with her mother, Catherine de Medici, who's much more famous for being kind of a Machiavellian manipulator and great poisoner of people who she didn't like.
yeah,
Well, you can imagine what being her daughter was like. And she actually married the man who went on to be the King of France, King Henry IV. Um, and Shakespeare, I found, I learned all this while I was in France, wrote Love's Labour's Lost about her and her husband, Henry IV,
interesting.
because they had kind of a crazy, I guess, chateau filled with all sorts of romantic doings, and everyone heard about them. And so this is why he wrote this play. When I got there and I learned this about them, I thought perhaps I wanted to write about him, but then I read her memoirs, and she was fascinating. She was a polyglot. She spoke 5 languages, including Greek and Latin. She had defended her brother in court. She was incredibly brilliant, and yet politically she was totally vilified because she had married a Protestant and she was a Catholic, and there were slaughters going on. There were religious wars all the time. So all that I could learn about her was, oh, she was a huge slut. And I thought, this woman is not a huge slut. I just read her memoirs.
Yeah,
She's fantastic. So
sure.
I've written the book about her. It is called The Serpent and the Rose. And
Excellent.
it is coming out on the 19th. What's today? The 15th. It's coming out 4 days from now.
Perfect.
And you can buy it on Amazon or anywhere, any bookstore that you want to go to.
Yeah.
But Amazon keeps account. And so it helps me. Um, and it's funny in places. I gave her a voice. I've done it in diary form where she's like, you know, mom's forcing me into this marriage, except it's the 16th century version of that.
Yeah.
And it's good. I think it's good. I think people
Excellent.
would.
I have no doubt. Catherine, this has been wonderful. I'm trying to get out before the proverbial Zoom door kicks us out. So
Yes.
thank you so much for your time today, for your story. Best of luck with the book and
Thank you.
everything else. I appreciate it.
I enjoyed this very much.
Me too. Thank you.